Hi, everybody. I have just recorded a podcast with Emmanuelle Saliba, who serves as Chief Investigative Officer at a deepfake detection company called Get Real. We talked about her past career in journalism, focusing on digital deception and how it prepared her for her role at Get Real, where she helps protect enterprises, governments, and individuals from AI enabled identity threats and deepfake attacks. This is a fast growing threat to both companies and individuals, and I believe a topic of increasing relevance. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Hi, Emmanuelle. Welcome on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You currently serve as Chief Investigative Officer at GetReal. Can we start by talking about how you got to this point and what you've done prior to GetReal?
Yes. So prior to Get Real, I was a journalist for over 10 years. I worked in broadcast in the US for big broadcasters like NBC and ABC. I really started my career in visual verification. So at the time, it was called social news gathering, but it's essentially the ability to verify content that's circulating online. 10 plus years ago, in journalism, that was just we started to understand that information being shared on social media was extremely valuable. It was the first place where breaking news events would happen. It was everyone got one of these in their hands, and suddenly we had a lot more footage and photos to work with. But that also meant that it needed to be authenticated. So I built and managed teams that verified breaking news content, and I did investigative work as well. And I ran my own YouTube channel at one point to help audiences understand how we verify content and helping them navigate at the time a complex online world. It is even more complex than it was 5 to 6 years ago when I had the channel, which landed me at ABC News, where I continue to help audiences figure out what's real, what's fake, giving them opportunities to understand the tools that were starting to develop. At the time, it was Gen AI that started to appear. And so I helped audiences understand what these tools were capable of doing, which eventually led me to Get Real, where I lead investigations and expert response, which is essentially we at Get Real protect enterprises, governments, and individuals from AI driven identity threats and deepfake attacks. My mission has always been to help people and to help audiences understand what's real and fake. And that is continuing my mission, but from the technology side and working alongside scientists and researchers trying to build technology that will protect companies and help individuals spot deepfakes.
So, would you say that what you do today at GetReal is similar to investigative journalism?
I would say that my experience understanding how information moves online, what kind of threat actors are out there, how misinformation spreads, um, all of that cumulative experience over the last decade, right? Figuring out, getting to a source, figuring out um, where misinformation started, or who's behind, what is the intent behind a false piece of content. All of that has helped shape my work at Get Real. But we are very much, I work hand in hand with digital forensic researchers, and Dr. Hani Farid, who is the pioneer of the science. And so we kind of have both of our expertise working together to help companies figure out what they're looking at.
And how do you compare, when you started in this career trying to understand what is real, what is not in terms of online content, and when you compare it to what you've been seeing now at Get Real, how much has the landscape changed over the years?
It's changed tremendously. When I first started, we were sort of naive about content circulating online at the time. TV producers would just take an image or video and throw it up on the air, throw it up in their coverage. And soon enough, we realized people are using old images, old videos during breaking news events to try and fool people and get views. I mean, the idea of scams, um, bad actors, all of that intention has remained the same, but it's the tools and the technology at the disposal of those who are looking to harm or to fool audiences that has changed. So at the beginning, we were dealing with edited images or old images circulating, or a lot of people pretending to be victims of a mass shooting, for example, or pretending to be a witness of a terrorist attack. And fast forward 10 years, we are now completely inundated with content that is nearly impossible, if not completely impossible, to tell whether it was created by a human or whether it's synthetic. And it's not just either or, it's really complex because now people are using, we're becoming it's becoming second nature to use some of these generative AI tools. They're built into our phone, right? When we take a photo, we can edit it, we can remove an object, we can clean up a background. All of these things that weren't so easy to do at the time, now that barrier to entry is completely reduced. And so there were techniques that we've always had in journalism to verify visual content and visual evidence. um, I would say that today we need technology on top of that skill set.
Maybe you could define our terminology at this point
Yeah.
to make sure that everyone understands these words, because you mentioned deepfakes, you mentioned synthetic content. What are
Mhm.
deepfakes exactly, and how do you distinguish it from synthetic identities or synthetic content?
Yes. Deepfake is really more of the popular term that most people are are used to hearing. It dates back to 2017, 2018, when a user named Mr. Deepfakes, actually the root of it is quite horrendous, right? So the beginning of how this type of content started was back in 2018, where a Reddit user started to share um, naked videos of actresses and swapping out the faces of already existing pornography and putting the faces of actresses. That's how the term deepfakes was coined. It later became popular vernacular to describe any type of content that was generated using a generative AI tool. So some of many people will have seen Pope in a puffer jacket, which was kind of the turning point when we think of what I call synthetic content or interchangeable with deepfake. It was the turning point for everyone, for I would say a mass audience to start to realize what these tools were capable of. And at the time, that was generated with Midjourney. I had found the person who created it. And it was already felt like it was so hyper realistic. Jump to today, 2 to 3 years later, it's hard to call them deepfakes because the implications of them can be so profound. Um, so we sort of interchange it with synthetic media, which is essentially created using any Gen AI tool.
Okay, and are there today, are there any reliable tells that content was is a synthetically generated?
I have a hard time answering that question because, and I always have. And the reason why is that every time I did, a new model would come out and it would correct whatever error, you know, the technology was getting at the time. At the time, it was very popular to say that there were six fingers, and that was a good tell that the image was synthetic. Or look in the background and the faces were melted. Little by little, with each new model that came out, all of those things were corrected. Not only in images, but video is getting extraordinarily good. So every time I give a little tip, a little advice, a week or two later, something comes out and it's corrected it. And I think what's impresses me the most is that recently I would have said, well, if we're talking about replicating human beings, I would have said, look at their skin. It's always overly polished. It looks a little waxy. They're a little too perfect. And now you have entire pipelines of, you have entire like workflows where you can add in imperfections to make sure that people can't, your consumers or your users can't actually tell that you've created an entirely fabricated persona. Um, then there are ways forensically that we're able there's the technology, and then forensically, if you look at the shadows, often, and, the Hani will explain that AI is very good at mimicking physics, but doesn't quite understand it, and so therefore, all of the things it's replicating a physical world, but you can tell when you're applying certain forensic techniques that the image is synthetic. For example, it doesn't understand the vantage point. That's one of the things that we look at on cases that are more complex. Um, we can look at shadows and lighting. That's another one where it often fails. Is this something an everyday person is going to do? No, it's not. Um, but it is a tool at our disposal for those who have a little bit more, who are more trained, who are trained as forensic scientists, etc.
I was just thinking of your video that Get Real published with these synthetically generated influencers, and it is really, yeah, like with a naked eye, impossible really to distinguish.
Yeah. I would have said the voice was flawed at some point, right? Like the voice always sounded a little robotic, and now they've corrected it. And as I was making that piece, I was using a lot of content from one model called Kling, which at the time was like was the most hyper realistic. And then Sea Dance came out with a new model, and not some of the footage that you see in there is coming straight from Sea Dance, and that they had another jump in realism. And when I mean realism, I mean the way that the synthetic this synthetic person, this synthetic avatar moves in the space, right? The way that they talk, the way that they move, like the body language, all of that is becoming really true to reality. There's some things that it can't do that's like very weird that they can't do, like singing. I don't know if you've ever seen an AI influencer, AI avatar sing. There's something really off with their tongue, like the movement of what their tongue is supposed to do, it doesn't match at all the way that they're singing. So but you have to be like super attentive, right? To those details. But that's kind of a tell in terms. So if the avatar is singing, they can't do it very well.
So would it be a good thing to do when someone calls you impersonating another person that you know, some family member, to ask them to sing?
Well, it could. Well, the issue of that is that in real time impersonations, it's often a real human body, just wearing a different face mask. So it's not an entirely generated piece of content. So it still retains some human properties. Like if I'm using cling motion control, that's not real time, but it's still based on a human motion. And then if you're doing real time, if you're changing your voice in real time or changing your face in real time, like I don't that you're able to still keep the characteristics of a human.
I was also thinking, as I was watching the video, when I was, trying to come up with some possible strategies to verify if this is an actual person, to use some facial recognition technology, which could show me that the entire digital footprint of this persona is only 1 month old, and I don't see anything historical. Is that a way to verify?
Yeah, that could definitely be a way. I mean, there's although now they're very good. If you take some of the big influencers, they've been around already 2 to 3 years on the platform. And then they're very good at repurposing old accounts that have existed for 6 years and filling it with content. Um, I'm always skeptical when they're trying to sell me something, because more often than not, every single one of these accounts is trying to sell you to drive you to buy something, right? Drive you towards buying vitamins, some like bogus health hack, some ebook, some clothing store. Like there's always a push towards consumption and buying, and that's sort of one of the things that always raises a flag for me. And then the other thing I've noticed are the patterns that they're creating. People are creating these accounts based on different niches, so they're really preying on people's like emotions and what they know is going to lead to views based on social media algorithms. So one of them is like, a big niche on social media is self-care and self-improvement. So they're creating these AI influencers and these AI avatars within those niches. So you're going to have one big theme is like bounce back after a divorce. So I've seen like all of these fake videos, and then does it push you towards buying some weight loss pill, some supposed weight loss pill? And so in every single niche, there's like self improvement. You have one that's like fake podcasts giving you financial advice or marriage advice. And so every single category, health, fitness, you have now AI influencers created for the sole purpose of like farming engagement and selling you something.
And do you see only commercial applications for these AI influencers, or do you also see them, in the context of some state-backed disinformation campaigns?
We see them in the political realm. So that's always been the case. That's what I meant at the beginning when I talked about there's a certain way where being like not like bad actors have always done this. It's just that the technology at their disposal has changed. And so, or even the way that disinformation, propaganda, or narratives have worked online is the same. It's just the technology now in the hands. So, one example is influencers. Campaigns have used influencers on social media, paid them to push a certain narrative or a certain point that they want to get across in elections. Now, instead of paying actual influencers, they're just mass creating their own and creating accounts. And, there was this example with the MAGA influencer, except that one was created by, I think, a student in India. And that was also for the sole purpose of making money. But now there's evidence as well that some of the campaigns, on both sides are creating their own accounts of influencers.
And do you think the ability to generate these synthetic social media accounts really represents a fundamental shift in terms of, let's say in the past, this is just some, arbitrary numbers. I don't have any statistics on this, but let's say in the past, Russia could have influenced like 10% of the population of the, I don't know, Czech Republic to vote in a specific way in parliamentary elections. Do you think that now, since the bad actors have access to this technology, this impact can be potentially much higher?
Yeah, I mean, it's will give any nation state and any bad actor the ability to mass create the type of content they were creating before. Think about when the war in Ukraine broke out. One of the first videos that we called deepfakes was of of Zelensky. It was created, Emily, by Russia, announcing that they were going to retreat, telling the troops to go back home. They also, I think, hacked and got it on TV and on the radio. Um, Ukraine was very reactive and said immediately that it was not an authentic video, not to believe it, etc. But it did have this like initial impact, even though it was really terrible. Like it was an awful deepfake. Think about what that would do today. Um, and even without the video, like the voice is so good. Um, Voice generative AI audio is so good at replicating any human being's voice. that you only need 3 to 5 seconds of audio, and if you take even more, it's um, even more believable. If that were to leak, it creates enough panic and enough confusion, right, to have an impact already. And now, yes, and the issue is that we're also this is going to be distributed on platforms where we don't have visibility. If it's on Instagram, if it's on Facebook, like eventually journalists will it will get in the hands of a journalist, right? But when it's going through WhatsApp or through Telegram channels, like that becomes harder to know how this content, where it's spreading, how it's being made, etc. Um, yeah, I can imagine that you can do a lot more harm now.
And what is the solution then? If as you said earlier, that you cannot really tell that a social account has been synthetically generated with a naked eye, is the solution just not to use social media and only rely on established media platforms?
I think this is going to be true of every form of digital communication, that we are going to move towards a world where we cannot have unverified conversations and where we will not trust something that carries some form of verification. Whether it's a mix of provenance information, so how has this photo or image been created or edited, whether that's using this C2PA standard or synth ID, which is Google's invisible watermark, we are going to start to only be able to rely on believing content that can show us how it's been created. I think that's the way the world is going to move.
And if we kind of focus more on the corporate sphere, how would you say businesses can safeguard against the increasing risk of deepfakes passing ID verification?
It's a complex issue, but we are, for example, we're developing technology where we can detect deepfakes or the use of any synthetic voice or filter in real time conversations. So on a Zoom, on a WebEx, on a Teams, we can alert security teams or an HR team whether or not the person sitting in front of you is one real, and whether or not they are who they say they are. Because it's not just a question of is this person real, it's also a question of are they who they say they are with biometric information, and do they stay consistent within, for example, a hiring interview process or throughout the company, or did someone come in and usurp their identity? There, I think the number one thing is already for enterprises to be aware of the threat, to understand how these tools are capable of bypassing identity checks. They're already doing it. There was recently a story that Instagram accounts were hacked using, I don't know if you saw this, but essentially, hackers claimed that they hacked thousands of Instagram accounts, including the White House, using the AI chatbot and just telling the AI chatbot that they had lost their password and giving their information. And then if there was the second layer of verification, which is a selfie, they were able to bypass it by taking the profile images and animating it using AI. And so a lot of these liveness detection methods aren't deep fake proof. So the first step is making sure that the systems you have in place are deepfake resistant.
And are you aware? I don't know if this maybe you have different providers in the United States. I think in Europe, the
Mm,
most frequently used platforms for remote identifications are ID Now and Web ID.
mm,
Let's say if you wanna uh, register on a car sharing app, they will
mhm.
only require, let's say they will use ID Now as a verification platform, and they will only require you to take a photo of your ID and then take a selfie, and that's it. Uh,
Yeah, no, that sounds like that could easily be bypassed, just given how incredibly good the ability to generate a synthetic ID. Like there were videos circulating recently of Grok, even from OpenAI, synthetic ID plus synthetic person. You can match, right? You can create like a believable synthetic ID plus a person. So if you're doing also even just a live verification, you can inject that video of a fake person holding up their fake ID and pass. So no, that would not be sufficient.
So what would be the solution?
There has to be built-in deepfake detection, synthetic detection, not just verifying biometrics, but deepfake detection, making sure the content isn't synthetic or the person isn't synthetic, and then going on to the second step of biometrics and identity, continuous identity verification.
Okay, understood. Let me ask you this one last question.
Yeah.
I know this is also quite complex, but what would you say is the threat horizon for deepfakes? How do you see it changing over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think that we are going to see a lot more attacks surface. Like we hear about them because we are talking to CISOs and enterprises and governments. But I don't think we've scratched the surface of how this technology is going to be used to break into financial institutions, into governments, um, to steal information, to steal funds, and to scam the individuals. And at the end of the day, an individual is also an employee. And if they're vulnerable in their personal lives, they're vulnerable on your enterprise systems. Um, so I think we've only seen like the tip of the iceberg in terms of the types of threat we are going to start seeing.
Well, it sounds pretty scary, but yeah, just something that everyone has to take. Businesses, individuals have to take seriously.
I mean, it is scary. It's I encourage anyone to take a look at what these tools are actually capable of doing with your own identity. And I would be scared. I would be uncomfortable.
Yeah. But a good place for people to start is to listen to this podcast and be informed. Yeah. So, Emmanuelle, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.